Known as the Merry Monarch, Charles II had countless lovers throughout his life. He made no attempt to hide this aspect of his character, and often flaunted their beauty and charm in public. Among this array of women, none was more beloved by the public than Nell Gwyn. Charles II's father was the infamous Charles I, also known as the Beheaded King. He was the first monarch in European history to be executed by his own subjects. After his death, Oliver Cromwell established the Commonwealth of England, appointing himself Lord Protector and consolidating both military and political power. As for the exiled heir, Charles II, his life took a dramatic downturn. Fleeing England, he roamed across Europe, relying on the charity of royalist supporters and the hospitality of his royal relatives. His life was far from regal during this period. Without money, Charles had to shamelessly depend on friends and relatives for shelter. When one household could no longer host him, he moved to the next. If Cromwell's forces pressured his hosts, he simply fled to another country. To survive, he occasionally relied on his musical training from years of elite education, performing in the streets by singing or playing instruments. When royalist supporters sent him funds, he indulged in food, drink, and hired companions. But when the money ran out, he resorted to sleeping under bridges and scavenging meals at relatives' homes. Charles's dignity as a royal heir was thoroughly trampled during this time, and his vagabond lifestyle persisted until the spring of 1660. In 1660, Oliver Cromwell passed away, leaving his son, Richard Cromwell, unable to maintain control. The Royalists seized the opportunity to bring Charles II back to England, restoring the Stuart monarchy. Thus, Charles II returned to London in triumph, married Catherine of Braganza, the daughter of King John IV of Portugal, and reclaimed his place at the pinnacle of power. Years of hardship had profoundly shaped Charles II's outlook on life. He came to realize that life was short, and whether one toiled or indulged, it was still the same lifetime. Embracing this philosophy, he adopted the principle of living life to the fullest. Londoners often saw Charles II strolling through parks with his King Charles spaniels. He was approachable and frequently stopped to chat with commoners. His wit, humor, and self-deprecating nature, shaped by his past struggles, made him deeply relatable and beloved by his people. During Cromwell's Puritan rule, all forms of entertainment were strictly prohibited. In contrast, Charles II lifted these bans upon his return. Theaters, brothels, taverns, and racetracks regained their former vibrancy. Not only did Charles II allow these establishments to thrive, but he also enjoyed frequenting them himself, openly and without pretense. His ability to rejoice with his subjects earned him the nickname the Merry Monarch. When Charles II ascended the throne, Nell Gwyn was just 10 years old. Her exact birthplace remains uncertain. Some claim she was born in Oxford, while others believe she was a true Londoner, born and raised in the city. Nell Gwyn's father is believed to have been Thomas Gwyn, a Welsh soldier who fought for the Royalists during the English Civil War. He reportedly died in Oxford debtors' prison due to unpaid debts. Nell's mother, Helena Gwyn, was possibly the daughter of a clergyman. After her husband's death, Helena had to resort to the world's oldest profession, prostitution, to support her two daughters. A few years later, Helena, known for her beauty, ended up working as a prostitute near Russell Street in Covent Garden, London. Young Nell grew up in this environment, learning to navigate the complexities of human behavior early on. She amused clients with her wit and charm while ensuring their drinks kept flowing. However, these details are speculative, as some accounts suggest that Helena Gwyn may have been more of a heavy drinker who ran a brothel, rather than working directly in prostitution. What is certain is that Nell grew up in extreme poverty, surrounded by the harsh realities of London's slums. Around the age of 12, she reportedly became the mistress of a guards officer named Robert Duncan, who helped her secure a job selling snacks at London's Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. This position, reserved exclusively for young women, was colloquially known as Orange Girl. Orange girls sold fruits, candies, and small sweet Chinese oranges to theatergoers during performances. The job required them to dress provocatively, engage customers with quick wit and playful banter, and ensure steady sales. In addition to selling snacks, orange girls sometimes acted as couriers, delivering little notes from wealthy patrons to the actresses for a small tip. While carrying out one of these errands, Nell caught the attention of a man named Killigrew, who recognized her sharp wit and natural charisma. Convinced of her potential, Killigrew sent Nell to acting school, intending to develop her into a star performer. In March 1665, just 1 month after turning 15, Nell Gwyn made her stage debut. Nell Gwyn's talent for acting was undeniable. She excelled in comedy, particularly in blending witty dialogue with physical humor. The young beauty quickly became a natural on stage, adored by audiences and playwrights alike. Thomas Dryden wrote scripts specifically for her, while diarist Samuel Pepys described her as pretty, witty Nell, and unabashedly declared himself her biggest fan. By modern standards, Nell became an overnight sensation in London. Nell's widespread popularity was matched by her striking appearance. She had shiny auburn hair, playful hazel eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a radiant, enchanting smile. But her allure went beyond her looks. Nell's well-proportioned figure, ample bosom, shapely legs, and petite feet made her a true beauty of her time. If there was any flaw to be found, it might have been her diminutive stature, but this only added to her unique charm. With fame came no shortage of admirers. Wealthy and influential men flocked to Nell, hoping to win her favor. Among them was the notorious libertine Charles Sackville, the Earl of Dorset, with whom Nell had a brief affair. However, as Nell juggled the attentions of various suitors, the Duke of Buckingham emerged with a grander plan. He sought a new mistress for King Charles II, aiming to replace the king's dominant consort, Barbara Palmer. Nell, ever sharp and pragmatic, was not swayed by the Duke's promises of boundless wealth and prestige if she could win the king's affection. Instead, she decided to negotiate directly. "I'll do it," she said, "but only for an annual salary of £500. The Duke balked at the price, finding her audacity unsettling. What if the king isn't even interested in her, he thought. The negotiations came to an abrupt end, with neither party reaching an agreement. Perhaps it was fate that destined Charles II and Nell Gwyn to cross paths. Not long after the Duke of Buckingham's failed negotiations, Charles II himself attended one of Nell's performances at the theater. Captivated by her lively and playful presence on stage, he wasted no time introducing himself to the charming actress after the show. Charles invited Nell to dinner, accompanied by his brother, James, Duke of York, and Mr. Leverel, a cousin of the Duke of Buckingham. The dinner was lively and filled with laughter, but by the end of the evening, an awkward situation arose. None of the three men had brought money to pay the bill. Nell stepped in, paying for the meal herself, and jokingly remarked, "You three are the poorest friends I've ever had." Charles, accustomed to beauty, found Nell's sharp wit and humor utterly refreshing. He began pursuing her with fervor. When Nell playfully mentioned, "Your friend thought my price of £500 a year was too high. What do you think?" Charles laughed and replied, "£500? That's far too little. I'll give you £4,000 a year." And with that, the young actress from humble beginnings became the king's official mistress. Charles wanted Nell to move into the palace, but she refused, calling it a cage. Having grown up in difficult circumstances, Nell did not believe their relationship would last forever. and preferred to maintain her independence. She continued performing on stage and chose to live in a luxurious apartment Charles had provided for her. To Charles, visiting Nell at her residence became an exciting escape, akin to a secret rendezvous. When news of Nell's relationship with the king spread, many curious onlookers flocked to see the woman who had won the king's heart. Her fame soared, and she became even busier as playwrights began crafting roles specifically for her. However, what Nell thought would be a fleeting romance turned into something much longer lasting. In 1670, at the age of 20, Nell gave birth to Charles II's son, Charles Beauclerc. A year later, she welcomed their second child, James Beauclerc. For the sake of her children, Nell ended her acting career and dedicated herself to raising them. Although Charles II adored his dear Nell, he was, after all, a seasoned philanderer with a wide array of mistresses, each with her own charm. When Charles once asked Nell to invite another of his mistresses, the Countess of Castlemaine, to a ball, Nell retorted, "Your Majesty, I think one whore at a time is quite enough." On another occasion, Nell was out shopping with her carriage and coachman. As she exited the store, she found her coachman embroiled in an argument. Curious, Nell asked what the quarrel was about. The coachman fumed, "That man dared to call you a whore." Nell rolled her eyes and replied, "Well, I am a whore. He's not wrong. Perhaps you could find a different topic to argue about?" Unlike many of Charles II's mistresses, Nell was not greedy. She was perfectly content with the £4,000 annual allowance he gave her. Despite her position as the king's mistress, Nell Gwyn never forgot the aristocratic fans who had supported her during her time at Drury Lane Theatre. Whenever they fell on hard times, Nell was always willing to lend a helping hand. Over the years, she took on the responsibility of supporting her mother and relatives. Though often looked down upon, Nell frequently donated anonymously to charity through her friend, Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Tennyson. When it came to vying for the king's attention, Nell had her own priorities. She didn't seek titles or wealth for herself, but was determined to secure a better future for her son. On one occasion, Charles II came to visit Nell and their child. Nell called out to the boy, "Come here, you little bastard, and say hello to your father." When the king protested against her choice of words, Nell quipped, "Your Majesty has given me no other name by which to call him." Charles II took the hint. Shortly afterward, he bestowed the title of Earl of Burford on Nell's son, and later elevated him to Duke of St. Albans. Nell was not fond of her rival, Louise de Querouaille, the Duchess of Portsmouth. Louise, a French woman, had been a lady-in-waiting to Charles II's sister, Henrietta, in the French court. After Henrietta's death, Louise claimed to be destitute and crossed the English Channel to seek refuge in England. Charles II warmly welcomed her and promptly installed her as another official mistress. As a Frenchwoman and a Catholic, Louise de Querouaille was the subject of constant suspicion in England. Rumors swirled that she was a spy sent by King Louis XIV to influence the English court. Unsurprisingly, the English public despised her. Nell Gwyn, too, harbored a strong dislike for Louise, who carried herself with an air of cold nobility and treated Nell with disdain. Behind Nell's back, she accused her of being crude and disrespectful in conversations with Charles II. The king, amused, paid no attention, but when these remarks reached Nell's ears, she refused to let them slide. On one occasion, the two women had a heated argument at court. Charles II arrived to mediate, only to find Louise weeping delicately, playing the damsel in distress. Nell, unimpressed, covered her mouth theatrically and quipped, "Your Majesty, don't you think the Duchess looks like a weeping willow?" Charles burst into laughter, and the dispute fizzled out. In another incident, Nell's carriage was stopped in the streets of London by an angry mob who mistook her for Louise. Shouting and jeering, They demanded that the Catholic whore get out. Without missing a beat, Nell leaned out of the carriage window and shouted, "Good people, you are mistaken. I am the Protestant whore." The crowd erupted in laughter, instantly charmed by Nell's wit and humor. They began affectionately calling her the People's Whore. Unlike Charles II's other noble mistresses, Nell came from humble beginnings. While the king adored her, her commoner status meant she never received a title, nor did she seek one. True to her practical nature, Nell lived on the £4,000 annual allowance from the king, using it to purchase several properties and some land. When not with the king, Nell lived at her home in Burford, where she hosted a small salon. This lively gathering included actors, musicians, poets, and playwrights, a vibrant circle of creative minds. Despite their lack of high status, they brought energy and novelty to Nell's life. Even Charles II often joined the salon, enjoying the relaxed and spirited company. When Nell Gwyn first became involved with Charles II, many predicted that his interest in the actress would be fleeting. Yet, the two shared over a decade together, weathering ups and downs until the very end of Charles's life. By the time of his death in 1685, Nell was one of the three mistresses who remained by his side. When Charles fell gravely ill, a devastated Nell pleaded to visit him at the palace, but her request was denied by his conservative brother, James, Duke of York. Despite having numerous illegitimate children, Charles left no legitimate heir to inherit the throne. Indifferent to this fact, he had already named his brother James as his successor. On his deathbed, Charles summoned James and gave him a heartfelt request: "Let not poor Nellie starve." Upon ascending the throne, James II honored his brother's dying wish. He paid off Nell's debts and mortgages and granted her an annual pension of £1,500. However, James prohibited her from attending Charles's funeral or mourning him publicly in black. Nell withdrew from court life and spent her remaining years with her sons and close friends. Nell never pursued another relationship. When a wealthy suitor proposed to her, she famously replied, "I will not allow a dog to defile the bed where a lion once lay." Unfortunately, Nell's health soon declined. Some speculated that she had contracted syphilis from Charles II. In 1687, she suffered 2 strokes. The first paralyzed her left side, and the second confined her to bed for months. 3 years after Charles's death, Nell passed away at the age of 37. Her funeral drew massive crowds, with mourners filling the streets outside St. Martin in the Fields Church in London. Archbishop Thomas Tennyson, a close friend and confidant, personally officiated her funeral and ensured she was buried with dignity. Despite her unorthodox life as a royal mistress, Nell was deeply loved by the English common people. She never forgot her roots in the slums and used her wealth to support the poor. In her will, she left gifts for her servants and staff and allocated significant funds to charity. Perhaps it was this generosity and humility that endeared her to so many. Nell Gwyn will always be remembered as the girl who rose from the streets to win the hearts of both a king and a nation. Though her life was tragically short, Nell Gwyn made every moment count. She rose from the slums of London to become a celebrated actress, winning the admiration of people from all walks of life. She then transformed herself into the long-term mistress of King Charles II, securing wealth and titles for her children. Her son, Charles Beauclerk, had 12 grandchildren and the title of Duke of St. Albans remains with Nell's descendants to this day. A lively, outspoken mistress with a thick Cockney accent and humble origins, Nell's story did not fade with her death. Instead, it became even more beloved. To the aristocracy, Nell may have seemed an interloper, a woman who carried the grit and coarseness of the streets into their refined world. But to the working class, Nell's fiery, witty personality, shameless humor, and unvarnished honesty made her an icon. By the Victorian era, she was celebrated as a symbol of London's vibrant working-class spirit. She was not the rigid, idealized lady of oil paintings, but a real girl who existed in the fabric of everyday life, playful, charming, bold, and loyal. By the 20th century, Nell's story had been adapted into plays and brought back to the stage, ensuring that this spirited woman would remain one of England's most cherished characters. Even Winston Churchill once described Nell Gwyn as possessing a beauty beyond compare.